Hey everyone, Mr. W here. Today's lesson is on rounding numbers through the hundreds place value. Rounding, for example, if we were to take 785 and we just want to find a number that is close to 785, our first decision would be to say, what do we want to round to? In this case, we're going to round it to the hundreds place value, which would be the 7. So our first step would be to underline the hundreds place value. The next step would be to take that digit and the digit to the right, which is the 8, and box it. That number in the box, 78, we are now going to round that to the nearest 10. Today we'll be using a rounding chart. We would find 78 on the rounding chart, and notice that 78 is in between 70 on the left and 80 on the right. It's going to be one of those two numbers that we're going to pick. Those are called tens. Well, 78 is closer to 80, so we would say that 78 rounds to 80. Then our last step is that we're going to turn that 5 on the right into a 0. So we would read this problem as 785 rounds to 800. So we're doing problems like that today. Our strategy will be rounding numbers to the nearest 10. So for example, 48, if we were to find 48 on a number line, and we would have to round it to the nearest 10 on either side, which we have there in yellow. So 48 is in between 40 and 50, and we have to pick one of those, and it's closer to the 50. So we would say that 48 rounds or is closest to 50. What are tens for today's lesson? You'll hear tens a lot. That's when you count by 10. So all of those numbers that you see are tens. Now sometimes that's confusing because, is that 30? That's not a 10. Or that's 70? That's not a 10. Don't confuse the word 10 with tens. 10 would just be the number 10. But tens that has the S refers to every number that when you're counting by 10. So all of those ones in blue are what we mean by tens for today's lesson. A rounding chart is when we just take a number line like we saw previously with our tens in yellow, and we're going to take that and to cut it up into pieces. The problem with rounding chart is that they just will not fit on a piece of paper or on a computer screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to break that up into pieces. So for example, the 0 to the 10, we break that up into a piece. And then the 10 to the 20, then the next section. And as we stack them, eventually we're going to come up with a rounding chart that looks like that. Notice on the left and the right, there's those columns in yellow. Those are the tens that we need to round to. And we'll have to pick either one. So for example, 23, if we wanted to round 23, we would find that on our rounding chart. Notice that's in between 20 on the left and 30 on the right. You will have to pick one of those two numbers. The one you pick will be the one that's closer. So in this case, 23 is closer to 20, so 23 rounds to 20. Or 69. We would find 69, and that's closest to the 70 on the right in this example, so 69 rounds to 70. The 5 rule is when, for example, you have a number like 35, and we find that on our rounding chart. It's in between 30 and 40, and we have to pick one of those two numbers. Well, it's the same amount of spaces to the left or to the right. So the question is, which one do we pick? Well, the 5 rule says that any number that ends with a 5, like 35, and any of those numbers in the column that ends in 5 rounds up. Up on a rounding chart means that we're rounding to the right side, not to the left. So in this case, 35 would round up to 40, even though it's the same distance to the 30. So we would say that 35 rounds to 40. We said that there's 4 steps. For example, 342, if we want to round that, we're going to underline our place value, which is the 3. We're going to box that and the next digit. The 34, we're going to round that to the nearest 10. And we're using a rounding chart today. So 34 is in between 30 and 40. We have to pick one of those two numbers, but it's closer to 30. So our last step is we take the 2 on the right and turn that into a 0. So we would read this number as 342 rounds to 300. Okay, example 2, 864. Our first step is to underline our place value. Then we're going to box that number and the number to the right. The 86 we're going to round to the nearest 10 using our strategy of a rounding chart today. 86 is in between 80 and 90, but it's closest to 90. So we would say that 86 rounds to 90. And then our last step is to turn that 4 into a 0. And we would read this problem as 864 rounds up or rounds to 900. Example 3, 458. Underline, box. The 45 we're going to round to the nearest 10. We're using our chart today. 45, and we can see that that's right in the middle. So we want to use our 5 rule, knowing that the rule is that we round up. So 45 rounds to 50. And then we take that 8 and turn that into a 0. And we would say that 458 rounds to 500. When you round numbers that have 95 through 99, there's an extra step. I'll show you in a second. So what you're looking at is the very bottom of our rounding chart. Notice the numbers 95 through 99. So for example, 962 rounded to the nearest 100, we would underline, we would box the 96. We're going to round 96 by finding that on our chart. Notice that 96 is closest to 100. Now here's where you want to pay attention. The 100, when you write that, is a 3-digit number. The extra digit, make sure that you put off to the left side, not the right side. If you do that, you'll be fine. And then we're going to take our final digit to the right, the 2, and pop that into a 0. So our answer would be 962 rounds to 1,000. What you don't want to do is accidentally put the 100 to the right with your 0 off to the right. If you do that, you will have the wrong answer of 100. Okay, so let's do some problems. The directions, round the numbers to the nearest 100. Number 1, 714. We're going to underline, box. We're going to round the 71 to 70. We get our 70, and then we're going to turn that 4 into a 0. So 714 rounds to 700. Number 2, we underline, box. 26 rounds up to 30. Turn the 3 into a 0. And 263 rounds up to 300. Number 3, 459, we underline, box. The 45 on our rounding chart, that's going to be our 5 rule, remember? So that's going to round up by rule. 45 rounds to 50. The 9 pops into a 0. We would say that 459 rounds to 500. And number 4, we underline, box. Notice that 97 rounds to 100, right? Just make sure you write that 100 and slide that over to your left side, okay? And you'll be fine. And then pop that remaining 2 into a 0. And we would say that 972 rounds to 1,000. Okay, so in review, we said that rounding means we just need to get close or near to a number. We used a strategy of a rounding chart today. Our tens are either on the left or right side, and we have to pick one of those. Don't forget the 5 rule, meaning that a number that ends in 5 has to go up to the highest 10. Our 4 steps are to underline, box, round, and then 0, the digit to the right. And don't forget the special problems with 95 through 99. Thanks for watching, everybody, if you made it this far, and we hope to see you on the next one.